Hi, I'm John Matthews, veteran law enforcement officer, winery owner, and your host for the podcast version of True Crime and Wine. And I'm pleased that you've joined us for this unique podcast where we feature the fascinating world of serial killers. Well, of course, enjoying award-winning wine. So why serial killers and wine? Well, the answer is simple. Since I'm the only winemaker in the world that's ever captured a serial killer. Yes, a real serial killer. And no, I didn't use wine to do it. So this is real true crime and real wine. And each episode, myself and Brandy Diamond, the popular podcast host of Texas Wine and True Crime, we together we take you on a journey of profiling some of the most interesting and intriguing serial killer cases from all around the world. Well, of course, enjoying a glass of wine. Now, I've got my favorite Casaro wine today. It's our Primitivo, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But you can pour yourself a glass of Killer Cabernet or Murderous Merlot and join us for the podcast version of True Crime and Wine. Now, in this episode, we're going to take you on a journey profiling into the life and crimes of Robert Bardella, a cold-blooded serial killer who raped and tortured his victims. And yet, to many that knew him, he was just a flamboyant, civic-minded citizen who volunteered in the community and even chaired the local crime watch group. I want to welcome in my co-host, Brandy Diamond. And Brandy, this is a really unique serial killer that presents two totally different personalities. One of a good citizen, and the other, as we know, he was a monster.
Yeah, a complete sociopath that we're going to learn about. The way he disposed of the bodies, the way he was viewed from the community as someone who was a good citizen. And like you said, he was head of the crime watch and eventually asked for more patrols to monitor the murders that were happening.
Yeah, absolutely crazy. To me, he is a pure sociopath, as you had said. He exhibited charm and charisma to some, and yet a total lack of empathy and remorse to the ones he killed. Absolutely amazing, and we're going to dive into it right now.
Okay, John. So today we are talking and profiling the serial killer Robert Bardella. Part of our show, John, is you profiling starting at a young age. We always want to talk about their early lives. What was their upbringing like? Where did they come from? Robert was born in 1949 in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. He is the first of two sons to Robert Sr. and Mary Louise Bardella. So he was raised in a strict Roman Catholic family. Father was Italian descent. Mother was German British. Now, he was smart, but he was a loner child. And a lot of this, John, started when he was 5 years old. A speech impediment, had thick glasses, was bullied by his peers. So we're starting to see in his early life, again, physical abuse, emotional abuse. And this is really where our show differs, is looking at this early life and then where this takes them later on when it becomes a part of their serial killing. Another part of his early life, John, is he became or really recognized his homosexuality in puberty, but he kept this a secret and then eventually had a girlfriend in his early teens. So what are you picking up early in Robert's life?
Well, Brandy, there are certain things that we always look at and, the boxes we check. And certainly from a very young age, he checked loner. He checked that physical disability / deformity that we see in so many of these, sociopaths later on in life. He did have a speech impediment, vision problems, wore thick glasses. You can imagine now he's a loner. He's got thick glasses. He's bullied a lot. lot. He's not popular in school. He's unathletic. So all those things that kind of kids look at growing up and the
Mhm.
peer pressure from other children, he's got check marks against him and against him and against him in nearly every one of these blocks. And then you add to it some of the physical and emotional abuse that he suffered.
Yeah.
We learned that really his younger brother was the favorite of the two sons. And, that happens in families. But we also learned that he was physically abused by his father,
Yeah.
who used to beat him with a leather strap. So, early
Yeah.
on, these are some of the things that I'm picking up on. And as he moves into his teen years and young adult life, we see this continuing, some
Yeah.
of these characteristics that we identify as precursors to a serial killer.
Well, and I think the aggression may be from the father because we know he becomes aggressive in his mid-teens, just rude, he's condescending, especially to women. He did show some interest in activities, right, John? Cooking, art. But then we talk about things that happen and early in their lives that may have some sort of traumatic impact on their brain. And could this have been that his father died of a heart attack at the age of 39 years old? He then finds religion, but then becomes cynical. And then you have a mother remarrying, right? Which causes a little bit of resentment. He becomes more withdrawn, still has these hobbies, but then he is raped by a male coworker at 16 years old and stops attending church.
Yeah, well, that's just huge. Obviously, some of the death of his father. Now he's with his mother, but his mother's remarrying. She's got a new love in her life. He really never was the favorite child anyway. Now he's even more removed. So he lost his dad. In his mind, lost his mother. Found religion and then lost religion and became very cynical. So all of these things are adding up. Being raped at 16,
Yeah.
he finally said, that's just it. I just, can't take this anymore. And he withdrew. And he kept withdrawing, which brought on further resentment from people his age. He was teased more, he was bullied more. And so it was kind of a downward slope, that snowball that keeps building up speed. And he has all these terrible things happen to him in his
Um,
teen years. He did have some solitary kind of habits like painting and collecting coins, but one that I thought was really strange, right,
mhm.
was that he had pen pals.
Okay.
And that wasn't strange, right? I mean, because back in that time, 1960s, if you wanted to communicate with somebody, you wrote them a letter and they wrote a letter back.
Mhm.
But what we learned later on, one of his pen pals was a highly known rapist at the time. So,
Huh.
really, really kind of strange that you would pick a rapist to be a pen pal with. And I think that ties into this. I'm a loner, I'm unattractive, they're teasing me, and I've got to find some attachment somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was the lack of connection to the father. I think that having the resentment for the mother, and like you said, losing the mom, right, to a new love interest. And I find it really interesting, John, that the movie, there's a 1965 film called The Collector, and he's watching this at age 16. And this actually had a profound impact. Um, well, first of all, it was about fantasies of abducting and holding people captive as specimens. And we'll learn about what this guy was doing to his victims. But this isn't the first time, John, I've heard about movies, right? Somebody watching a movie, being fascinated with something happening in the movie, and then turning around and acting it out in real life. So, what do we know about the movie Collector and this guy?
Well, I think it's all forms of entertainment. There
Mm,
are always triggers, right?
okay.
In in everybody's life, right? There's
Right.
certain books that if you ask me about, John, what books really influenced you growing up or had an impact on you. And I think we can turn to entertainment. So whether it's books, whether it's movies, whether it's music, right? Some
Right.
certain types of music, genres of music impact people. Um, but you rarely see it taken to the extreme, right?
Right.
You rarely see a theme in a book taken to an extreme where somebody is so obsessed that they kind of make it the theme of their life. That's what he did with the movie Collectors, which was a movie about abducting and holding people as captives. And for some reason, he latched on to this theme and it became an obsession for him. And so that's what we don't normally see with most people. Like I said, you may read a book and go, "Wow, that really impacted me. That was really poignant." Or maybe you learned from it. I read this book when I was 16 and it launched me on a career into finance or accounting, or I started doing investments. I watched Wolf of Wall Street and all of a sudden I wanted to be a hedge fund manager. We
Yeah.
see that,
Yeah.
but not a morbid fascination with holding people captives and treating them as specimens. And that's really what he did.
Yeah, and this is at 16 years old. And so my thought is, okay, he's still in high school, right? But we know he graduated from high school. He had excellent grades. He enrolled at the KC Art Institute in 1967. He wanted to be a professor. We talk about this too, right? You have
Right.
these thoughts that are running through their head. They try to be a good part of society. He was there. He was a talented student. The second year, he was involved more in like drugs. So he starts maybe getting into the wrong crowd. But now we go back and now we see this animal torture happening, decapitated a duck and tested sedatives on a dog. So we're starting to now kind of see this evolving.
Yeah, so he's now obviously late teenage years, early 20s, going to college. Things are great the first year. He wants to be a professor. I mean, he's a intelligent person. I think he realizes he's intelligent, but again, gets in with the wrong crowd, starts abusing drugs, starts selling drugs, and then kind of that slippery slope. I don't really know where the animal torture comes in. Is it his fascination with treating animals now as specimens, going back to the movie?
Mm,
That could be the start of it. Maybe he's not evolved yet to people, but he's certainly going to try it with animals. And what really was fascinating to me about this is not the torturing so much. We see that a lot. It's the testing of sedatives. So
okay.
to me, that's a precursor that he wants to do something else.
Mm,
He's testing sedatives on animals. And to me, it's, well, if I can sedate them and I use X drug and Y amount of that drug, how much can I extrapolate out and use on a person? So this isn't just torturing animals or abuse of animals. To me, he's already got another goal in mind. And that goal is a very nefarious one. And in 1969, just 2 years into his college career, he withdraws from college. So any attachments that he would have had during that time are now gone. There's a total difference of killing an animal,
yep.
maybe killing the animal and skinning it for taxidermy, or killing it and dissecting and abusing it. And we've seen that with many, many killers.
Hmm.
But sedating the animal, to me, that is, I'm experimenting
Yep.
for something bigger. That's
Yeah,
kind of what I'm thinking.
absolutely. Okay, so we talked about a little bit about of his background. Is there anything else standing out to you as a profiling perspective
Well,
as we're moving towards his late teen years?
yeah, look how many boxes he checks. We already know, and some of this started, like we said, at 5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
He is a substance abuser. Death of a parent at a very young age. His dad was only 39. Mom remarried. He kind of got left out of that bonding, that love relationship. He was abused by his dad. Certainly, we see some issues with the drug use, the drug addiction, physical characteristics. I think we mentioned that from a very early age, the vision problems, the thick glasses and all. He was intelligent, so he's going to evolve into one of these serial killers with a above normal intelligence. But from a social skills standpoint, Brandy, he's a loner, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't have the attachments and maybe the social skills that he needs, and yet because of his intelligence and his kind of makeup, he still comes off as charismatic to some people.
Yeah.
Animal abuse, we certainly checked that box. Matter of fact, I checked that box and put a star by it, for what we said about the sedatives. And we don't know about his criminal history yet, but he is going to start committing crimes, which is another box that we're checking when we profile these serial killers.
And, John, I think before we get into like his escalating crimes starting around 19 years old, a thought I had is his idea of being a professor, his ability to be in college, I thought about the drug use, right? There's college kids who use drugs. They don't drop out and not pursue their dreams, right? It's maybe they just get mixed in with the wrong crowd. But this actually changed his life, right? This is now going to create escalating crimes. At 19, he's arrested for selling methamphetamines. He gets a 5-year suspended sentence. 1 year later, he's arrested for marijuana and LSD possession. So we're going to start seeing this.
A month later. He's spiraling out of control pretty quick here, right? Yeah.
So we see this drug abuse starting now in 1967. He's now openly gay, spends a lot of his free time with male prostitutes. Now we have the prostitutes coming into the picture, drug addicts, criminals, runaways. So this is a very extreme. So I'm thinking from a perspective of dropping out of college, then doing this, starting at age 19. I mean, this is a quick escalation of behavior.
Yeah, to me, though, it's also a continuation. When he lost his dad, and then he kind of lost his mom because she remarried, and then he found religion and he lost it. He's searching. He's searching for that connection. I think he thought he found it in that first year of college, and he fell in with the wrong crowd. And he started using drugs, abusing drugs, dealing drugs. And I think what you're seeing is a search for any type of attachment. But unfortunately, the only people that want anything to do with him are the male prostitutes, the drug addicts, the criminals, and the runaways. So you're really falling in with the wrong crowd.
And then he gets a career, though. He starts to work, starts to be a good citizen of society. So what do we know about his, sort of young life career?
Well, so I think we've got this kind of like a train here, Brandy. It got dual tracks. Okay. On one side, we see that he's fallen in with this wrong crowd, abusing drugs, using drugs, criminals, male prostitutes. On the other side of the track, right, they're parallel going right down together, we see that he's settling in and a degree of normalcy. So which is the true Robert Bardella? And I think what we're going to see is they both are for an extended period of time. So you've got the bad side of the track, and now on the good side of the railroad track, we see that he started to work as a short order cook, but he quickly advanced to a senior cook, joined the Chefs Association. He actually helped build training programs for chefs. We also see that he sold art and antiques, that he started off like many people renting a booth at a flea market, but within a couple of years had turned his hobby into a very profitable full-time business. He moved to 4315 Charlotte Street in Kansas City, bought the house, and that's the house that he was going to stay in really for the rest of his time that he wasn't incarcerated. He became active in his crime watch group and even rose to the position of chairman and volunteered for public TV. So we see that track, right, that looks really kind of straight and narrow and wow, he's got his life together.
Mhm.
Now the other track's creeping in, though. What did he do with his house? Well, he turned his house into a boarding house. And who did he let stay at the boarding house? Well, it was the same people on that bad track, right?
Right.
Drug addicts, prostitutes, criminals. And he learned that if he could bring them in with low rent, cheap rent, free rent for a period of time, that he could very quickly control these individuals. So on one side, you've got the guy with a career and a profession. And on the other side, he's opening this boarding house up to the only people that'll associate with him. And it's not the people you want to be around.
John, we're now going to get into his crime sprees. Victim number one, Jerry Howell, July of 1984. This is a white male, 19 years old, an acquaintance of Robert's. He was lured with a ride to a dance contest, and he was then drugged in the car, and then he brought him home to the house he's running and drugged him even more. I think back to the sedatives of the animals.
Yep.
He then ties him to the bed, rapes and tortures him for 28 hours before Howell is asphyxiated. He drags him to the basement where he placed him over a pot to drain his blood, and the next day used a chainsaw to dismember him. He placed his body parts in trash bags, left him for the garbage crew, and he also kept a detailed journal of the kidnapping, rape, and torture of Jerry Howell. So, John, what are we seeing in this first murder?
Well, one of the things that we're seeing is he has no empathy for anyone. This is not a stranger. This was an acquaintance. This is somebody that he knew. And they were like, hey, you want to go to this dance? Yeah, that's great. I'll give you a ride. We'll go to the dance together. And of course, then he drugs him, brings him home, rapes, tortures him, and kills him. To me, what stuck out, though, was how long he was there. So often we have crimes. We see it with married murderers. We've done that podcast, Brandy, where they will kidnap somebody. They will torture them hour, 2 hours. Maybe the longest, they keep them in their apartment 3 or 4 hours. We saw this with Rodney Alcala, but it's a fairly short period of time. And here, we're already talking about over a day that he is raping and torturing this young man. And it's just going to get worse. It brings me back to that 65 movie, The Collectors, that impacted him so much. In the movie, they abducted and tortured people, kept him as specimens. So that's really what, stood out to me is how long he kept him. But then you got to think, was this his first murder? Wasn't it? Because he was very organized about this. He brought drugs with him in the vehicle to drug his acquaintance. He had drugs at home that continued to keep him sedated. He then raped and tortured him. And then after killing him, drained his blood in a pot So he knew exactly how to hang him up, how to cut him, how to drain the blood so that there wouldn't be any blood when he finally dismembered him the next day. And then he just discarded of them. We see bodies that are dumped, thrown out of cars, tossed to the side of the road. He didn't even take the time to put him in the car and drive him somewhere. He literally put him in a hefty bag and left him for the city to deal with.
So, John, I'm going to ask you about when it comes to torturing for, like you said, for this one, 28 hours. We're going to see in the next victim, it was about 3 days. And then, it gets worse from there. But what is the fascination with keeping them around longer? Is it the enjoyment and the satisfaction of seeing the pain you're causing? Is it just the power, the continuous hours of power you have? I'd like to know your thoughts on that.
Well, we know that serial killers, there are several different reasons or several different ways that they get their high, right? That they get that ultimate satisfaction. Some, it's with the murder, right? The murder, that's it. When they finally, especially folks that strangle, when they finally strangle them to death and they feel them die right in front of them, that's what gives them that high. Others, it's the sex, right? So they're having sex either before they're dead or after they're dead, but the sex is what gives them that high. With this type of killer, it certainly is the torture. The torture is what this guy's getting off on. And he wants to see how much pain he can inflict, how much he can torture a victim, and how long he can keep them alive to keep doing it. Not too dissimilar to Rodney Alcala, the serial killer who would choke his victims to the point of death, revive them, rape them, beat them, choke them again, revive them again, and just keep repeating the process. But this guy is torturing them for an extended period of time for his own enjoyment. And then the other thing that I found fascinating is he kept a very, very detailed journal of every aspect of the crime. Many of these guys remember it. I mean, they can tell you years later who the victim was and what they did with him and where they dropped him. And Bardella felt the need to keep a very extensive, detailed journal. So to me, was that another piece of a educational tool? Was he doing it from a research standpoint? Was he doing it not just to relive the crime, but to study it and see how he could get better, how he could keep him alive longer, how much pain he could inflict? So again, very, very unique part of this fascinating case.
Yeah, it is quite fascinating. And I also go back to, the chessboard killer, right? And you have the alphabet. And again, it's like in the maps that some of these guys kept in their house, mapping where they had put bodies. So they all had something. And I would agree, because he created training programs for chefs, because he wanted to be a professor, because he would probably keep notes of the sedatives of the animals. I think it is a very detailed account of what he's doing, whether he wants to replay it later on or whether it's sort of a guide for himself. Quite fascinating how detailed he's learning, right? He's getting better at his craft.
Yep, writing it down and going. It's almost like cooking and doing a recipe. Yes. Well, I really didn't like this. I replaced it with this. It was even better. So next time, maybe I'd try something else. That's what I see it as.
So we've got Robert Shelton, next victim, April 1985, white male, 20 years old, staying at the house he was running, drugged and tortured him for 3 days. John put drain cleaner in his eyes, needles in his fingers, and caulk in his ears. Now he's going into using chemicals and other things to then torture him. Suffocated with a bag over his head and rope because a worker needed access to the house for repairs, so he had to get rid of him. Took him to the basement, dismembers him, and then again disposes him in trash bags for the city to take.
He might have kept him longer. right? He might have
Mm.
kept him longer than the 3 days, but that worker needed access to the house, so he had to get rid of him. Kind
Yep.
of forced his hand, and he's like, oh my gosh, I got to get rid of him and then clean up before I let the worker in, the repairman, and suffocates him, strangles him with a rope, and then takes him to the basement where he dismembers him, and again, simply throws him away in trash bags. Obviously wrapped him up enough that the trashman never noticed at this point and just threw him out with the rest of the garbage. But we can see he's evolving, as
Yes.
many of serial killers do, and now he's experimenting with chemicals and other forms of torture. And again, this was not a stranger. This is someone who actually lived in the house, and he may disappear.
Well, he also murders another acquaintance, John. In June of 1985, a white male, 27 years old, Mark Wallace, drugs him, then tortures him over a day with electrical shocks and needles inserted into his back, again, evolving, like you said, into using other tools for torture. Dies from drugs and a gag from a lack of oxygen, dismembers him, and leaves him again for the trashmen.
And like with the last victim, I don't think he wanted to kill him. I
Yeah.
think he wanted to continue to torture him, at least not kill him one day into it. Because now we see he's evolved into electrical shocks and needles in his back. And in his journal, he wasn't quite sure how he died, but he thought he might have died from the combination of the drugs and being gagged. He simply didn't have enough oxygen and choked to death. So I think he would have kept him alive longer. I
Mm.
think he would have tortured him longer. And maybe, thankfully, mercifully for the victim, he died after just a day.
So, do you notice? Okay, so what I'm noticing just in these first three that we're talking about is he bored? Is that why he's bringing out the electrical shocks? Is that why he's bringing out the chemicals? Is it not satisfying enough?
I think he's evolving. I
Okay.
think he's keeping this detailed journal, and he goes, if I do X, this is the reaction I get. If I do Y,
Mm.
whoa, this is the reaction I get. I wonder what happens if I do Z. Because again,
Ah.
he's very organized about this, very methodical. He's changing his methodology. I think he's learning, oh, wow, maybe I can't give him that many drugs and gag him because he's going to choke to death. Then I don't get to experience the torture like I wanted it. So I think he's evolving as a serial killer, and he intentionally is getting worse and worse and worse
I
to
see.
these victims.
So now let's talk more a little bit about the profiling with the victimology, right? We know white male, 19 to 27 years old. They're either acquaintances, drug users, or, living in the house that he's running. He meets them at, different places. He's luring them in, promises of drugs, sex, a place to stay, and then geographic profiling. So, John, what are you picking up when it comes to the victimology and the geographic?
Well, when I look at the victimology, the biggest thing that stands out is each of these victims willingly. Well, the first one, not so much, because he was drugged in the vehicle. He did willingly go with the killer. But the other ones willingly were with the killer and were in his house. So there wasn't like he had to hunt them down. He didn't have to, hit them, knock them out, anything like that. They willingly went with him under a ruse of going places, or they stayed at his house, or they knew him. He was very consistent with his victimology, all white males, 19 to 27. He didn't care if he knew him or not. He still would torture him and still would kill him. And he met him at a variety of places where he hung out, like gay bars and parks. And I think he even met some at one of the places that he worked. But pretty much everybody was lured with some type of promise The first victim, it was a simple promise of a ride. The other victims, I'll let you stay in the house. I'll give you reduced rent. We could do drugs together. We could have sex together. And they willingly accepted it, not knowing how horrible of a decision it was going to be. Now, on each episode of True Crime and Wine, we feature one of our Casaro winery brands. And it's just fitting to share with you what I'm enjoying today. It's a glass of our Primitivo, which is an Italian-style Zinfandel, with all the aromas of cherries and flavors of blackberries. This dry red wine pairs well with pizza, calzone, and of course, there's absolutely no better wine to enjoy when you're listening to True Crime and Wine. Salute.
Okay, John. So we've had a couple of victims in 1985. We had Robert Shelton, we just spoke about, Mark Wallace, and now we're going to get into James Ferris, which was in September of 1985. This is a 25-year-old white male, a bar acquaintance. You mentioned he would frequent gay bars. He drugged his meal and then tortured him for 27 hours with electrical shocks and needles to his genitals. Again, evolving, died delirious from drugs and torture. He was dismembered again, then left in a garbage bag for the garbage men to pick up. So we see some evolving here, John. He's now putting needles into the genitals.
Yeah, and some of his crime is evolving and other parts are staying the same, which tells me he's satisfied with the parts he isn't changing. He feels good about the way he drains their blood. He feels good about the way he dismembers them. And he hasn't been caught yet wrapping him up and leaving him in garbage bags for the city to dispose of. So he feels good about those aspects of his crime, which are really ancillary to how he gets satisfied. And he gets satisfied through the torture. And that's what keeps evolving, with electrical shocks now and needles to the genitals. So he's keeps growing in the manner and fashion of how he's torturing his victims. And it's almost like when they die, oh, well, they die. I know how to get rid of them. Nobody's on to me. Nobody knows anything about these crimes. So I'll just move on to the very next victim.
Yeah, and I also wondered with the electrical shocks, he uses it again, right? He had it on a previous victim. And like you said, keeping that journal of what's working and not working, right? What he gets more excitement doing. So we're definitely seeing that in this case. John, 9 months goes by. So June of 1986, the next victim, Todd Stoops, a white male, 23 years old. So we're talking about a 9-month break from last victim, James Ferris, to Todd Stoops. Did he stop? Do we just not know what happened in those 9 months? I want to get your thoughts on that.
That's always the question, right? Anytime we see these gaps, he committed 3 of these pretty heinous murders in 1985 alone. Now we see a gap to 86. We're going to see another gap later on. My theory is there's simply victims out there that we don't know about. That's usually what it is. These guys don't just stop and start. He could have, however, been still raping and torturing some of his victims, but maybe not to the extent where he killed them. I find that hard to believe, though, so I think there might be other victims that are out there. I know with Stoops, he was a prostitute, he was a drug addict, and he lived at his house, right? So again, Bardella's not going out and hunting these people on the street. They're willingly coming to him because he promises them all kinds of things. Bardella does say in his journal, though, that he was attracted to Stoops. Now, this is the first one that we know of that there was any type of emotion, and in this case it was an attraction to this young man, and he tried to make him his sex slave. He kept him for over 2 weeks and tortured him. He injected him with drain cleaner in his neck, and this victim actually died from septic shock from a rupture he received during the torture. And I'm not going to go into it any further. Once he did pass away, though, Bardella dismembered him like he did with so many of his other victims and wrapped him up, put him in the trash bag, and put him out on the curb. So this is an interesting change in his MO a little bit, just because he said he was actually attracted to him and wanted a long-term slave. And this is going to be the start of his downfall, is now this obsession that he can capture somebody, rape them and torture them, and yet at some point they're willing and want to stay with him to be a sex slave forever. So we start to see a change in his personality and his thinking. I would even hazard to say we start to see this is where he begins to devolve.
2 weeks, John. And then, I find it interesting. He was attracted to him almost, I don't even know if I would use the word care for, but maybe a part of him wanted to keep him alive to be his sex slave. But I mean, drain cleaner in the neck. I mean, this guy's sick.
Oh, yeah.
I think of the injections he's doing and the way the body responds to these things, dies of septic shock from rupture. I mean, it's hard, brutal stuff to look at.
Oh, it is. And that's what I mean. You got to remember, at the same time that he's doing these brutal murders and torture, he's leading the neighborhood watch or the crime watch group. He's volunteering at public TV. And so citizens on the outside see him as a normal, what they called civic-minded citizen. And yet this is what he's doing behind closed doors.
So we talked about the gap from the 1985 to 96, but now we're going to talk about a year gap, because the next one we know about is Larry Pearson of June of 1987. This was a friend of his, a white male, 20 years old, held for 6 weeks and tortured, John. Compliant, but bludgeoned to death with a tree limb after biting Bardella. Bardella kept his head in the freezer before burning it in the backyard.
He was mad.
He was mad. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So this was a friend of his that, again, we see an extended period of torture. And what we learned during this 6 weeks is the victim became compliant. Like, okay, yeah, I can deal with this. So was this, and we've seen this in many other victims. We saw this in the Rodney Akala case, where the victim was brilliant, saying, you know what? I don't mind the rape and torture. I don't have anything. I'm a runaway. At least you're showing me some emotion. I want to stay with you. I want to be with you. Let's go back to your apartment, before she eventually escaped. Absolutely brilliant. We've seen it with other people who pretend that they like it or are compliant in some way. And we saw it with this individual until he got to a point where he couldn't take it anymore. He actually bit Bardella where Bardella did not want to be bit. And Bardella was absolutely beside himself, had to go to the hospital, had to get surgically repaired. But he not only killed Pearson, he kept his head in the freezer before finally saying, you know what? I'm done with this guy. Brought it to his backyard and burned it in his backyard. So almost you're not going to cross me, but you can still see that need. We saw that need when he was a young teenager. He was looking for any type of attachment. Now it's not just I'm going to rape and murder and torture. It's I really think I can change these people where they're going to enjoy it and want to be with me and
Mm.
stay with me. So I see this desperate need for attachment, even though he's doing these horrible, horrible things to him.
Is it delusional? Are there? I mean, to me, it's like they create. Is it fantasy? Is it creating just an alternate reality? I mean,
In their mind, the rape and the torture is justified if the victim all of a sudden becomes a willing and
ah,
compliant participant, right?
yeah.
So I'm doing what I need to do. It's almost like creating a Frankenstein, right? You know, taking disparate body parts and creating something new. In his mind, the torture, the rape, the brutality would have an end to it if they could be together forever, and but not in a equal partnership, but in a
Ah.
sex slave and master type of relationship.
Well, we talked about the victimology a bit. White male, 19 to 27, meets them at bars, most prostitutes, acquaintances, sometimes friends, drug users. Most of them go willingly, lured in from promises of those things, sex, drugs, a place to stay, and then drugged to be compliant and unconscious. We talked about this a little bit. Never had to forcibly take anyone off the streets, but sociopath, good communicator. But what is his MO, John? What are we seeing that Bordella wants or is need for?
Well, I think one of the first things that I bring out is that these people willingly went for a
Mm,
ride or stayed at his house. What that shows us about Bardella's personality is that he was a very good communicator. He was charismatic. How many times have we seen this in other serial killers, right? He was
right.
that pure sociopath, the murderer behind closed doors, but the good communicator and willing to talk to these guys at bars and convince them, look at me, you can trust me. I've got a boarding house. I take in folks like you that are down on your luck. I'm going to help you get on your feet. And they went with him.
Yeah.
So that was part of his MO, his ability to bring in these people that he would then strangle, that he would overdose, that he would held captive for anywhere from hours to weeks. We know that he raped them, he tortured them. He simply disposed of their bodies in trash bags, but he kept trophies, several trophies. He kept body parts we know of, photos of the victims, and journals, a very detailed journal. So again, I think he was evolving, growing, learning. He was documenting what he was doing, and he was on this search, this fantasy type search, and convinced that if he could bring these guys in and rape them and torture them in the right way, they would be compliant and sex slaves for life. And that's what he wanted.
Well, and you mentioned that was also his downfall because we know in March of 1988, his victim escapes. So what do we know about this one?
Yeah, this is absolutely fascinating because Bardella did it to himself, right? He
Mm.
keeps searching for someone that's going to be compliant. And we already saw in the last two victims, there was a degree of it. The victim said at some point, if I don't resist, if I pretend to enjoy this, if I pretend to be with him, maybe I won't die. With the first one that tried it, he was killed, and even if it was accidentally during the torture, because we think Bardella wanted to keep him alive. With the
Mhm.
second one, he got to a point where he said, "This is my chance. I'm gonna bite him. I'm gonna get out of here. I'm gonna escape." But he just could not do it and paid for it with his life. In this case of this gentleman, Bryson. He talked Bardella into tying his hands in front of him instead of to the headboard. So instead of being tied in a position where he absolutely couldn't move, if your hands are in front of you, there's a
Uh-huh.
lot of things you can do. That's one of the reasons we handcuff prisoners behind their back, right? Because there's a
Right.
lot of things that you can do with your hands tied together or handcuffed in front of you, still using your hands, using your arms, just a number of things. So when Bardella went to work at his antique shop that he had, Bryson managed to find some matches in the room. He burned
Mm.
his restraints to a point where he could break them. He then jumped out a second floor window. Now, he broke his foot in the process, but a meter reader was next door checking the electric or the gas meter and sees a naked guy in restraints jump out a second floor window. He's yelling to him that he needs help and to call the police. And that's exactly what happened. The police were called. He told them about his being kidnapped, about his being tortured. He said that at some point during that time, so he was there approximately 4 days, that he was shown Polaroids of what he believed were other victims. And he told the
Mm.
police, I think these other guys are dead. I think I'm the only one alive.
Mm. So he ends up, well, thankfully they believe him. They take him to the Bryson to the hospital. Um, this is his downfall because he is arrested. So how do they approach him? Again, the photos, are they looking for these photos? Do they immediately go to the house where he was staying?
Well, the officers split up, right? So one
Okay.
set of officers goes with Bryson to the hospital to make sure he's okay, get a full statement, get any other documents, anything he can provide for a warrant. And another team goes to a judge and they secure a search warrant for the residence. And still another team go to the house and place it under surveillance. They want to know when Bardella gets back. After hours, they get the search warrant. They get an arrest warrant for the assault on Bryson. And then police go to his house. And once in his house arresting Bardella, they see a trove of evidence from other crimes. They then continue their search, collect evidence, tag evidence. They actually formed a task force because they immediately knew this was going to be much bigger than anything that they had experienced before. They found photos of many of the victims and were able to identify those photos. And then once they had all of this information together, Bardella just kind of said, you know what? I guess you've got me. And he gave them a full confession and documented the details that he kept in those journals, which police had in their custody at that time. But he told them everything. Basically said, this is what I'm doing. This is what happened. Police figured out through the journals in his account that there were at least 6 known victims: Howell, Sheldon, Wallace, Ferris, Stoops, and Pearson. And then Christopher Bryson, the one that talked him, faked being compliant, talked him into being handcuffed in front, is the one that survived and escaped.
Yeah, and I do wonder, the 6 known victims, and again, the one that escaped, and then we talked about the timeline that goes by when there's no murders committed, or we think there's no murders being committed. Um, but Do you think he would have documented those? Do you think if there would have been other victims, he would have because he was so detailed in those journals? Or do you think this is much bigger than just this 6?
I really don't know. I don't know what his reason for stopping would be unless he was planning, doing research, wanting to know how he could torture his victims, what he could use. Maybe he felt that, hey, the first 3 died. I really didn't want them to die. I wanted to torture them longer. What else can I do? We know he was, an intelligent person. So there could have been things like that going on. But we do know that he continued this ruse with all of them. Saying that I'm a friend or I can help you or you can stay at my place. You can get lodging. We know he experimented with lots of different tranquilizers and sedatives. We know they experimented with electrical shock, that with injections, with chemicals. We know all of this from his journals. Police also found 334 Polaroids as well as 34 snapshots of his victims. That's a lot of Polaroids. And we know that he drained their blood and dismembered them and simply threw them out with the trash. Investigators did go to the landfills and look for the victims, but too much time had passed, too much in the landfill. They never did find any of the bodies. Now, as we head into season 3, I'd like to thank everyone for making our first 2 seasons so successful. We're so blessed that you've been enjoying and sharing our podcast and attending our interactive in-person shows all across the country. We've had quite a busy season ahead of us now, with a wide range of interesting and intriguing stories from all across the globe. Also, if you've got a winery near you that might like to host a true crime and wine event in person, just DM us on our socials, Instagram or Facebook, at JJ True Crime and Wine. Or you can always email us at truecrime@casarowines.com. And we'll see if we can fit into our schedule time that we can come and visit with you and your local winery. We look forward to seeing you not only on the podcast, but in person all around the country.
So you talked about, the Polaroids and the snapshots, which is interesting. I mean, I think that's common, right? Just having some sort of trinket or documentation from what you're doing. But then they go into this house, right? I like to think of a house of horrors. This wasn't just a 1-level home. These were multiple levels of this home. And they start piecing together maybe what was taking place in each of these areas of the house. So what did they uncover in this house of horrors?
Yeah, it was just absolutely crazy. The basement they discovered, as we know now, was used for the draining of blood and the dismemberment. And they found several saws down there, even saws that had blood and flesh still attached to them. The first floor was really kind of the only normal floor. That's where you entered the house, and the living room and various rooms like that, kitchen. But the second floor was used for captivity, and that's where the bedrooms were. And he had one particular bedroom where he would keep these men captive. The third floor, we discovered he would take them up to the bathroom to dismember them, some of them in the bathroom on the third floor before bringing them to the basement. They also discovered the backyard, buried heads, vertebrae, and other parts. And in one of the closets, and I think it was the second floor closet, if I remember right, they discovered a skull, photos, the journal that he had been keeping, a wallet, and licenses. So a
Mm.
treasure trove of evidence connecting him to all of the murders and all of the crimes is what they discovered in that house of horrors at
Uh,
4315 Charlotte Street in Hyde Park, Kansas City.
I find it interesting that he was, I guess part of the keeping the heads and the other body parts is just, and not getting rid of everything, I don't know. I guess you just keep on holding on to it like you do your like the photos, and again, keeping the wallets and the licenses of his victims. But man, he was not moving from that house, was he? He really
No.
kept it all right there.
Yeah, and that,
Incredible.
for geographic profiling, there wasn't a whole lot of it. We
Yeah.
do know that he did lure his victims
Mhm.
in from bars and parks and even the mall where he had his antique store. But they would go to the house, and then he did everything at the house: the rape, the torture, and the murder, and the disposal, because he simply took them out front. When we kind of look at this from a psychological profile, he had a depressive personality, sexual sadism disorder that was very fantasy driven. And I really think fantasy driven from an early age. That 1965 movie, that's what he said after he was arrested. What started all of this? Well, I watched that movie and it had an
Uh,
effect on me. Obviously, we're not going to blame a movie on someone being a serial killer, but that was something that stuck with him throughout his life. He was excited by the humiliation and the pain. We already said that he liked the torture. He had no remorse, right? He
right.
exploited the marginalized, prostitutes, drug users, criminals. He viewed them as play toys, his play toys. We didn't see any necrophilia or cannibalism because, again, what he got off on was the torture. And we do know that he was very meticulous about documenting his crimes, and the journals showed it to us.
I also find it interesting because he describes himself as civic-minded, right? Volunteer, a sensitive citizen. And you talked about the two tracks. So we have this guy who is a serial killer, obsessed with torture. And then we have, like you said, he worked for the Crime Prevention Association and the Neighborhood Watch. And people viewed him as a good citizen. I mean, is it just his own perception, John, of who he thinks he is versus what he really is? You talk about these two tracks. I
Yeah,
want to know.
I think he was a total sociopath, right?
Okay.
A
Hmm.
sociopath, psychopath are basically the same thing. That he was able to have this one life of murder at the boarding house and this other life where folks that commented about him said, yeah, we know him. We've known him for years. We thought maybe he was a little flamboyant. That I found that an interesting description. But we also think he was civic minded. He volunteered at not just one place, but at a number of places. And when he was the chairman of the Crime Watch, he even championed more neighborhood patrols. And I just found that absolutely, I mean, that is that pure sociopath. But we have seen it over and over and over again with some of these killers. And you can just go down the list of your favorite serial killers, but we see the charm, the charisma, the civic minded, the intelligence on one track, and the brutal torture and rape and murder and dismemberment. It's the same person. It's two tracks parallel to each other, but depending on who you are, you only see one side of it.
Mm, fascinating. All right, John, he will go to trial and he is convicted. So let's talk a little bit that he did plead guilty to avoid the death penalty and then confessed in detail in December of 1988. He was sentenced to life without parole for first-degree murder of Sheldon and then second degree for the others.
And I think the difference there remember some of those, I'm not sure if his intention, I think he was eventually going to kill him, but I think they may have died from some of his torture techniques. And I think that's what the difference between the first degree and the second degree is, but it didn't matter. They struck a deal with him and said, we're not going to put you to death, but you're going to give a full confession. You're going to be found guilty of all of these murders, and you're never getting out of prison alive.
Well, and he doesn't. In October of 1992, he dies of a heart attack in prison at 43, which I found interesting because his father died of a heart attack at 39.
That's right. Yeah.
But he complained of poor treatment by the prison staff. I don't know if he was blaming the heart attack or the possible... I don't know if they're correlated, but I mean, heart disease, we all know runs in family. And, if you've had a father or loved one pass away at a young age of some sort of heart attack, heart disease, you probably should be seeing a heart doctor. So this is probably more hereditary, but he is not alive. He died in 1992.
Yeah, after just 4 years in prison. And this is one of these that, oh my gosh, don't you wish that he had been in prison longer? Don't you wish that he had suffered more? But in his case, he didn't. And I think, I agree with you, is probably, a little bit hereditary, that his dad died at a young age and he died at a young age. But however you look at it, it was probably very fitting, him dying alone in prison, without his sex slaves after the horrific murders that Robert Bardella committed in Kansas City. And I think the death penalty, who knows, might have been too good. I think life imprisonment was probably appropriate. And depending on what you think about his crimes, maybe it was good he had died after just 4 years, or maybe you would have liked to have seen that punishment last just a little bit longer, because this was a guy that enjoyed punishment and enjoyed torture. Now, as we put a cork in this edition of our True Crime and Wine podcast, I want to remind our listeners that you can follow us on our socials at JJ True Crime and Wine, at JJ True Crime and Wine. And you can order wine, just like I've got here from Casaro Wines, at CasaroWines.com, so that you can profile the killers in each show along with Brandy and I. Now, I think that wraps up our business for today. And of course, I want to thank my co-host, Brandy Diamond, for joining me on this journey, and our producer, Lauren Bedso, back in the Corsicana Command Center, for helping to make the show possible. And Brandy, I can't believe it. We've already wrapped up 2 seasons of True Crime and Wine.
I can't believe it, John. Is time flying by, or are we just that good? Time is flying. It's been a pleasure already. I am looking forward to next season.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. I want to thank all of the listeners out there, all of those that have joined us on Spotify and Apple, on YouTube, and everybody that's joined us on the in-person shows. I can't believe it. 2 seasons gone by, and a 3rd one is upcoming. And during season 3, we're going to profile serial killers who loved people, hated people, and some with absolutely no emotions at all. I'm John Matthews, and thanks for joining us today on True Crime and Wine. Salute.
Cheers.